Hi, I'm Zach Murdoch, the local government reporter here at the Herald-Tribune, and welcome to our voter's guide for the 2017 Sarasota City Commission race. I'm here today with Patrick Gannon, a planning board member and president of the Downtown Sarasota Condominium Association. And Mr. Gannon, I'd like to just launch right into a question because you've served on the planning board and talked frequently lately about some of the frustrations you've had as a planning board member when the board and city staff will recommend things up to the city commission, and the commission, through deadlock or conversation, ultimately overrules or overturns it or delays it. You know, what comes to mind is the transportation plan, cask and ale, the women's exchange appeal, things like that. Tell me a bit about how you view the city commission's role in those scenarios and whether or not that's a good or a bad thing.
Well, certainly the city commission does have a policy-making role, more so than the planning board. Our planning board is really to interpret the code, listen to the staff presentations, and listen to the evidence brought before us, whether that's from the staff, the developers, and the citizens. So that kind of testimony is very helpful. But at the end of the day, we really are guided by what the code allows. Now, we can certainly, if we see an issue, make zoning text amendment suggestions or make recommended amendments to the comprehensive plan, as I've already authored a couple of those where I saw some problems that have arisen for that. But essentially, when we're dealing with that, we try and really go deep into the code. I usually read through whether it's 100 or 300 pages of background material. And I've had commissioners say that they rely on that. They know that when it's in front of the planning board, it's getting a deep dive. And that personally, I come prepared with lots of questions for the developers or for staff. And in some cases where on the planning board, we've had some differing opinions, or we're trying to get something approved, but it doesn't quite meet what we think the compatibility should be. And in fact, I've initiated suggestions to the applicant that maybe there's a proffer they could make. Now, we can't require that, but certainly suggest that. And in some cases, they have countered and said, great idea. We will accept that. We'll make that proffer, and then we can move this forward. And that's the type of collaborative process that I've been able to achieve on the planning board that I would like to see extended to the city commission, where they can go forward. So when you mentioned the transportation plan, we held a couple meetings at the planning board on that and had pushback on staff. And then it came in front of the city commission initially in October of last year, and there were serious questions raised by the commissioners there. And the staff came back the next month with changes based upon that, and it still was turned down. And then they had to quickly edit the whole plan and only transmit a very minor portion of that. And that was extremely disappointing after especially staff testified that there was over 40 public hearings and 8 years in the process, and other minor changes could be made after it came back. And so that was very disappointing that that didn't go forward, especially when people are talking about the traffic and the congestion, and here is in the plan is some of the elements of solutions to that. So let's move forward the plan and implement the mobility plan that's been 8 years in the development.
Speaking of long-term plans, let's pivot and talk a little bit about homelessness. Because it seems over the last year or so, the city, county, and the nonprofits have made progress moving hundreds of folks from the streets into housing. Yet there's still a bit of a struggle to try to get everyone on the same page, rowing in the same direction. I wonder what the city needs to do to try to elevate that conversation, push it further, and what the city's role is ultimately in the spectrum of homeless services.
Well, certainly where we can address issues, I know the city police department with their homeless outreach teams has made significant efforts, because the elements that has brought to the table is the police who are trained well in what the law allows and doesn't allow, dealing with chronic homeless and or crime on the streets, and what the caseworkers are able to do. And this is the one element that I've heard from significant number of organizations involved in chronic homelessness is case management is critical to tracking the individuals, making sure they get all of the services that are available to them, and then be able to move them into housing. I mean, that's ultimately the goal, is to get them into housing, get treatments too. So that has led to the progress. The most recent progressive step has been the implementation of the grant from the state together with the county and the city and the Downtown Improvement District for the Comprehensive Treatment Court. And that's going to have some significant impact, at least in those people dealing with the mental health and narcotics and other abuse situations, and try and get them to treatment that's so needed for that.
Yeah, yeah. Another huge issue that we've been talking about a lot at recent candidate forums has been the big development boom downtown. The Herald-Tribune termed it the billion-dollar boom, and there's been a lot of discussion about whether that's good or bad for the city, but I want to move past that because it's happening, it's here.
Yep.
The question is instead, how does the city commission and city leaders balance the boom with this kind of idyllic, historic vision of downtown of Sarasota as a small town?
Yeah. Ultimately, if changes need to be made, it's the code. There's a lot of people talking about changes in the process, but having been a part of that process, sitting on the planning board, and as a neighborhood leader raising questions and citizens raising questions, what we have discovered is that if there's anything to be changed, it has to be done through the code. That's really where that sets the criteria. Otherwise, if that continues to, projects have to go through hearings where the outcome is uncertain, that's going to cause a decrease in the investments to do that. Now, managing that growth is an important part of the planning function. And my background in the business and having been involved in strategic planning efforts, having led economic development projects, leads me to understand some of the things that have to be put in place to see the long-range effects. Also, my background in engineering, worked at NASA, so I understand how to integrate complex problem-solving processes, which it's the growth that deals with the providing jobs that then is impacted by the housing, and all that has to come together to have a workable plan.
So what would you need to do next then in terms of managing those things?
Well, some of it is making sure that the true costs are borne for the infrastructure. And already, in fact, this week's commission agenda is looking at the multimodal transportation impact fees. So adjusting those so that it's at the right level that provides the funding for the infrastructure pieces. I've already initiated an amendment to the zoning related to the tree mitigation. Again, asking developers to really seriously look at the cost of impact on the canopy, the tree canopy in a neighborhood where they're able to go in and in some cases reduce the canopy by 70%. That's having negative effects on the neighborhood. And so there needs to be a better balance on those things. But again, in both those cases, it's changes in the code, not necessarily the process for review.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for talking through a couple of complex issues with us. I appreciate the help. Patrick Gannon, again, one of the candidates for the 2 at-large seats. The election is March 14th.
Thank you.